Welcome to the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. My name is David Wheatley. We're here to talk leadership in small, bite-sized and practical chunks. Enjoy.
So, welcome to this episode of the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. I'm joined again by Rick Eigenbrod and Judy Brown, and I was listening to Rick on another podcast the other day, and I realized that I've been doing a disservice because I should say I'm joined today by Dr. Judy Brown and Dr. Rick Eigenbrod, and measly old me, but neither of whom have I ever heard introduce themselves that way. But I just do it for that. And today we're talking about inklings and glimpses. And I said beforehand I was going to start with a curveball because I heard something on the BBC a couple of weeks ago that really captured something I've been trying to frame up for a while. And it's that they were talking about those intuitive moments, that gut instinct. And the person said those intuitive moments are subconscious patterns. And I thought, what a beautiful thought, because if that's the case, then if we're having those gut moments, then we should be able to think a little deeper. And just to kick us off, years and years ago, back in time, as a young cop on the streets of London, I remember being in the area car with a guy called Barry. And all of a sudden, Barry did a U-turn in the middle of the road at speed. And I said, "What is it?" And he said, "I don't know. It's just my gut." And Barry wasn't a small guy. And so I said, "Well, I don't want your gut. Tell me what it is you saw." And we had a bit of an argument as he broke down eventually that what he actually had seen. And he couldn't really put a finger on it until we drove down the road. And he said, "Well, there's a light out, there's a car parked underneath it. And I think there was a series of burglaries down the street last night that I heard in the meeting. And we came on parade this morning." And so he started to piece together what was the subconscious that drove the U-turn. And then when he stopped and thought about it, he was able to help me see the patterns that I needed to connect as a young cop if I wanted to be able to make those kind of those choices. So I kick us off that way. And I joke that Rick's going to say, "No, that's all wrong." But we're talking about inklings and glimpses. And Judy, you were going to start us off with just a perspective.
Right. I think the words that have stayed with me from some chats we've had on this is that trusting inklings or glimmers or glimpses, you can have different words for it, means trusting wisdom that's coming to us from another place. We spend a lot of our lives looking at things that seem clear to us or relatively clear, or operating from plans, or operating from a set of possibilities we've considered. But inklings, these stirrings from within us, or glimpses or glimmers that come to us out of the corner of our eye when we weren't looking in that direction, and very likely they are subconscious patterns that part of us is wise enough to see, but the part of us that's in charge most of the time doesn't see them, is likely to ignore them, or likely to discount them, or likely to keep ourselves so busy that we don't even glimpse them. And I think for me, I love your example of what drove the U-turn. It's such a good example that he sensed something that you, being younger, wouldn't have caught, less experienced. But sometimes it's, if I think in my own life, it's not being new to the situation so much as it is having some kind of question in our mind that we don't even know we have. My example would be you guys were teasing me about the beautiful backdrop I have here. It's a gorgeous creek. And this is now the year 2023. And in 1973, I first came to the Washington, D.C. area, and it was all urban. And I'm a Midwesterner from a small fishing village. So I wanted to get out of town. And I drove out Route 50, and I was driving straight ahead, paying attention to the road. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw a creek. I now know the name of it. It's called Weems Creek. And in it were docks, a couple of kayaks, a sailboat. And I remember clear as a bell saying to myself, people live like that. People live in places like that. And then I went on about my life for another, you can do the math, how many years? 40 more. And then then I got the opportunity of moving outside of the Washington Beltway into a rural area. And my husband and I found this place on this creek, and I knew it was the right spot immediately. I mean, there were all kinds of arguments against it. We put 2 roofs on it, needed new windows. I mean, all kinds of things, but it was clear as a bell. And it wasn't until later, driving back and forth on Route 50 for various reasons here, I saw that creek again out of the corner of my eye, and I realized that that was a glimpse. That was a glimmer, and it had stayed planted in me for decades, so that when the opportunity presented itself, instead of looking for a fancy big home in a subdivision, this was the place.
So we're talking about data, information that comes to us that we're not necessarily completely conscious of, but
yes.
it's coming to us and so we've used the term today, glimpses and inklings. What's the difference between the two, Rick?
Yeah, Judy and I, of course, have had great fun in our conversations about this very thing. And what was a part of what was in the conversation initially was the sense of, I was very clear what inklings were, and Judy was very clear about what glimmers were. And the more we talked about it, and the more we tried to put language to it, the more elusive it became, because you got into things like instincts and hunches and whatever. And so I was just struck by the fact that what we're talking about in some way comes from a really unknown place and doesn't lend itself easily to being bound by language. But for the sake of answering your question, I think of inklings. The fundamental distinction is, from the inklings come from inside. That wisdom, that information, that picture comes from inside. Glimpses tend to come from outside. Now, I realize this is an arbitrary distinction, but for the purposes of our conversation, it may be useful to think of them that way. And I certainly, as Judy and I talked along about our experience in our own lives and our experience with our clients, it really broke down into those kind of 2 buckets. Like your partner in the car. That's one could call it an instinct, etc. But in some way, he had a glimpse of something from the outside that informed him, and that he followed through on, because he had come to trust his his sense about and the accuracy of those glimpses and the importance of them. For me, and a lot of the work I do, I'm working with people who, and I think we do, who are trying to make decisions, who maybe feel stuck, who don't quite know which way to go, who feel confused or muddled. And in that situation, the normal sort of methodologies and approaches we use obviously haven't been helpful. So for me, inklings come from the inside. I think maybe what we could do is give examples that may be more illustrative than trying to define it.
So either way, we're talking about kind of subconscious messaging.
Yeah,
we're either taking in that glimpse, that paying attention to the river, or having that distinct memory of the river, even though I maybe wasn't paying that much attention as I drove over it.
Right.
Or Barry's patterns being added together and making him just, hey, I just need to do a U-turn and just go check this out. I don't know why, but there's some gathering of data that's coming together that something's indicated. So it's a bit like, I think Gladwell's Blink talked a little bit about this as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's around us. We've just sort of settled on these two things. Let me give you an illustration from my own work that's really kind of unusual. But again, um, get outside of the specifics and focus on the process, if you will. A part of my work is with folks who have the enviable experience in their lives of finding themselves exactly where they wanted to be. Specifically, these are business folks who have experienced a quote unquote liquidity event. So they have worked unbelievably hard for for a very long time to get to the place where they can kind of cash out, right? And go do anything they want. And therein lies the issue. They are faced with overwhelming possibilities. And they will say things like, well, I got a call from New York. They want me to do this. Or I got a call from so-and-so. They want me to do that. And I could do the other. And my question always, of course, is, well, that's great. What are you going to do? And they say, I don't know. They're not pulled or pushed to anything. And we've talked about the blank sheet of paper. When faced with the blank sheet of paper, what do we rely on to move forward? And the normal sort of attitudes and outlooks that they have, planning, task oriented, it doesn't work for them. And every now and then, I will, in the work, I'll say something, I'll ask a question, or they will just blurt out something, and there it is. There's the answer to the question of now what? And it has three hallmarks for me when it comes. One is it has the sense of truth about it. Truth meaning it has integrity. Yeah, that's really true. I'm not making this up. It's not a possibility. This has truth. I can feel it and they can feel it. It has vitality. Their energy goes up. You can just see it, right? So it has vitality and energy. And then surprisingly, what I found, it's often accompanied by fear. And in the early stages, I used to think, oh, well, you can't do that because of the thing you just mentioned that you're afraid of. And I realized later on, no, that is often a hallmark of a true inkling, and that represents in some way the fear. It comes from the fact that they're on this thing. If they act on it, it will push them onto a developmental frontier. And it's really scary. All of a sudden, you get this extraordinary clarity, and the consequence of it come roaring at them.
So that's a tension, isn't it? That between the first two, if you like, that extreme clarity and that vision, that picture, and then the tension is the reality, which gets to the fear of, well, can I do this? What's the first step? What's the process? And that tension that is being brought up is probably what you're tuning into as you're looking on and saying that's the thing, because there's that natural tension. That's the thing. I don't want to belabor it, but I go back to Barry. Barry put two and two together, and immediately we were heightened in terms of what are we going into?
Yeah.
Because when you start to add up those subconscious, that it creates that sense of, oh, yeah, I'm on my toes now. I'm awake again.
Yeah, it's interesting how early on I would go along with it, come up with this thing out of the model. They'd come up with what I would really like to do is, right? And man, I'm watching them and I can feel it. And it just thinks, yeah, he or she really wants to do that. I can tell. And the energy that's associated with that, I can see it, they can feel it, anybody around them go, that's it, go for it. You got it. You're not muddled anymore. You're not confused anymore. You got it. And then comes the fear. And I used to think, oh, okay. the fear is a sign that you shouldn't. And now I came to understand over time, no, it's a sign that this is a really true inkling, that the fear is really associated with that unknown and all of their fantasies about what would happen. Catastrophic, a lot of catastrophe, help me here, catastrophe.
Catastrophizing, yeah.
About what would happen if they do and why they couldn't. And
Well,
that tells me it's a true inkling. It's a glimpse. I don't want to, we're moving into glimpses, Judy, but it tells me it's a hallmark of the authenticity of this picture that's coming from an unknown place.
and what it means is, while the initial reaction to the fear is, oh my gosh, this is not, I shouldn't be here, it really is a sign that you absolutely are in the right place.
Yes.
But I know in conversations, you've reminded me that the challenge is that people almost immediately, because of the fear or whatever else is in this tension, have a weapon that they use to kill whatever the possibility is on the spot. And I've been thinking about that in my own case. What weapons have I tended to pull out to shoot down what was really a sense of calling or inkling? And I think two come to mind. And one is, I'm a responsible person, and a responsible person doesn't haul off and do this, whatever this is, fill in the blank. And the second is, what will people think? And so when I think back to when I got the opportunity to join Pan Am as a flight attendant while I was in college, those two struck really hard. It was, wait a second, you're in college to go to college. A responsible person does not go wandering off summers flying back and forth to Europe. And the second was my mother. What will people say? And so, and I think back to that, and for some reason, and I think this is the thing we'd invite us all into, what helped us put down the weapon of choice with which we would like to kill the possibility and move through it into an area that we, with both glimpses and glimmers, something that never occurred to us before, all of a sudden has a real hold on us. And what helped us step through that, I guess, is the question that I have for myself. What makes a difference?
It's kind of interesting how you're framing that up, because we've got this truth and vitality, and then the tension with the fear. And, you know, why on earth would you take 2 months off to sail the Atlantic and, you know, your thriving business and cut it out for 2 months? And then the moment that you say yes to it, you immediately think, oh, everything that could go wrong, and this could be. But that tension is part, in my mind, of the vitality. That's
Yes.
that, because our best growth comes from that place of not fear, but that sense of awareness. I think your overlapping circles there of the three is what stimulates our probably our most dramatic growth.
It's exactly right, David. And if you went back and asked yourself, what is it that popped up that was going to kill the vitality? I mean, you were probably so enthusiastic when they said that initially, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna, oh man, would that be great? Sail the Atlantic for 2 months? Is that an inkling or glimmer? If it came from you, I would call it an inkling. If it came from the outside, I'd call it a glimmer. But it's the same thing. It's this wisdom and information about me that came to me from that I wasn't aware of, and often as surprise. Mm-hmm. You know, I have a story about myself that's similar to that. And so in that moment, is it true you want to sail the Atlantic, David?
Yes.
Was it exciting as hell for you to think about doing that?
Absolutely.
And could you think of all kind of good reasons not to?
Yes.
And if we said, talk to me about these reasons, we could begin to unpack it. The first thing is to understand that those usually are reasons not to, but to understand those are reasons that are providing part of the excitement, because they're pushing us up against our own developmental frontier. It's a part of the adventure. So if we frame the fear as part of the adventure, people tend to sort of go, oh, okay, I'm not, it doesn't mean I shouldn't.
Right. But, and it's the natural tendency there, isn't it? Because if I go back, I'd often been asked previously what one of my bucket list things was. And I never really have been a big bucket list drawer-upper, but the one thing I would always answer is I want to sail home one day. And so that's Judy's, I drove over the bridge thing. And so the moment that my friend said, I've just bought a boat in the Caribbean and I'm going to sail it back to the UK in spring, it was a matter of here's my moment. But I wonder whether part of that is the tuning in that we've been talking about, that the more we tune into these inklings or glimpses or this intuition, you know, he could have said that if I hadn't have been tuned in and I wouldn't have picked up on it.
Exactly.
But it's the tuning into the, I drove over the bridge and now I'm looking for a property and outside the Beltway. Those things, you know, you're tuned into that and you end up with the view behind Judy, and or you end up sailing the Atlantic. And all we're saying is leaders should be more tuned into those patterns of information that are coming in, and that will allow them to make better choices when they get there, even if there's fear.
Yeah, Judy, I'm going to say one thing here to David, and then I want to come to you about the White House Fellows, because it seems to me like that's a great example. David, if you sit with, you know, if you sit with a leader and they're muddled, well, I could do this, I don't know if I want to do that, I can't make a decision. If in some way you can ask a question or frame a question in such a way that you just say, you know, forget all that stuff. Using your best judgment, using your best experience, using what you know. What do you want to do? And they'll tell you. They'll flat bloody tell you.
Yep. And
they think they're confused. They have killed the certainty with confusion. Right? I work with people who like, I sold my company for $90 million, but I can't go do that. Why? Well, because I don't know if I can afford it. What? No, I'm serious. And yep. So, you know, it's like, okay, so maybe we want to talk about scarcity as a part of your experience and worldview, et cetera, because that's clearly at the developmental frontier. You know, what would it mean to you to think about yourself as someone, not who has a lot, but who has enough, right? And that's the adventure. Judy, tell us about the White House.
Well, I will, but the first thing that I was mulling around is what do we need to encourage leaders and other humans to do that will increase their attunement to these kinds of things? And what do we need to warn ourselves away from because it is likely to drown out the signals? And for me, I think way too much busyness drowns out the signals. Way too much sense of being responsible for everything drowns out the signals. Then the question is what attunes us, what turns the radio dial so we're likely to pick up the signals. And I think a variety of things, of different things for different people, but being out in nature, silence, my journaling process probably does it, music, athletics, different things that pull us away from the pitter-patter of the everyday that grabs our attention. So I think for a leader who's completely sort of dumbstruck about what to do next, you know, my suggestion might be take a walk, you know, just take a walk and see what you hear and what you see and see what that might suggest. I mean, when I went out for my walk today, there was a feather on my path. You never pass a feather by without picking it up. And I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. What does this suggest? Well, for me, it suggests the importance of holding things lightly. So simply putting yourself in a space where you can likely be attuned to the signals coming in from the world. And I'm trying to think, Rick, what you had in mind about the White House Fellows. So let me mention the White House Fellows program. For any of you who are listening, you should know about this because you should apply for it. It's a program nationwide that chooses 15 people every year from usually a cast of thousands who apply or are nominated from all different walks of life. And for a year, they work as assistant to a U.S. cabinet member or to the vice president or the president. And that's their internship. And there's an educational component that goes along with it. And this may lead to what the form that glimmers come as. I got invited to apply for this, and I remember thinking, you've got to be kidding me. There's no chance, and fill in the blank, that I'm going to get selected for this. None at all. But what the heck? It's a nice application. I might learn a little about myself. So I think part of this is a willingness, a curiosity about oneself that puts us more likely on the path. So I went through the process the entire way, having a wonderful time because I knew I wouldn't be selected. Somebody like me would never be selected about this. And before I knew, I was one of the last 32 in the running. And before I knew it, I was one of the 15 selected. Now I was terrified, of course, because I ended up as a special assistant to the U.S. Secretary of Labor in all of this. The lesson, I guess, as I think about it is, don't be limited by what you see as the possibilities in yourself. Take the steps, put feet on the path, 1 foot ahead of the other, and see where it might take you. That's the first one. The second is, allow other people to see things as possibilities for yourself that you wouldn't have seen. So my mentor in that program, John Gardner, was the one who said to me at one point, "You're a poet. You should be a published poet." I thought, this is the wackiest idea I've ever heard. But it turned out he was actually quite right about that. So sometimes it's somebody in the kind of role that Rick has, coaching somebody, David, or that you have, saying, I know you're turning aside from this thing that's intriguing to you, but I'm here to tell you that everything I see in you says go for it. That's a really important role in allowing people who are being beset by glimmers or glimpses or inklings to act on them. Just put 1 foot ahead of the other in that direction. So anyway, that's my rant at the moment.
Well, we're adding, in my mind, a few things together here, because we're saying, okay, let's make sure we're tuning into data, to what's there, and thinking about, at least paying attention to it. And then the second thing is, if you go all the way back to episode 60 of our podcast, we actually talked about spaces and the value of creating space, which is a little bit what you just alluded to, Judy, about whether it be in the woods or listen to music, or create the space to allow that to mull and to digest that data. And then the third thing is, make sure that you're not talking yourself out of it with that fear element that Rick's talking about, because I think that the kind of leaders that we probably all work with all have that rational, logical sense to them that could immediately come up with the 10 reasons why they shouldn't become a poet or start an ice cream company, or as a client of ours did, start their passion, which was incubators for puppies. But what it took was a little bit of a push. And that's actually a successful business, creating incubators for puppies.
This is going to be slightly off, but it's an inkling. I was thinking one of the things we can do is be witness.
Yes.
Right? It's hard for them initially when they have these inklings or a glimmer of possibility comes to them from the outside. It's hard for them to recognize it, and it's hard for them in the initial stages to recognize their own response to it, right? And how they kill it. I've learned that when I dig my heels in on about something, it's probably a great sign that I'm getting something that inspires me, that pushes me to in my discomfort zone. And so I've learned to use that. I think we can witness for people to sit when we sit with them, go, holy smoke, did you see how excited you got when you said that? Right? And it's sort of, it gives them permission to see themselves. And I think about, you'll forgive me, I think about Henri Cartier-Bresson, the famous French photographer, who was known for capturing decisive moments. And he describes these as capturing an event that is ephemeral and spontaneous. The image represents the essence of the event itself. And I think these inklings are ephemeral and spontaneous and capture the essence of the person themselves. And we can be the photographer and show them the picture.
So if I go from famous French philosopher, photographer there, obviously to a famous British philosopher, Michael Palin, when Michael Palin casts aside his jacket and says, I never really wanted to be an accountant. I really wanted to be a lumberjack. And you see on stage his bright, and he becomes happy and cheerful and excited about that. What we're saying is we should, as leaders, as coaches, should be tuned into that passion that goes with that. And rather than say, well, don't be silly, get back to your abacus, to say, well, let's explore that.
Right. To say, that's my job. To say, recognizing this. Because the truth is, people follow leaders for lots of different reasons. One of them is they follow the energy and vitality of the leader. And when the leader has it, we're much more apt to follow. And when the leader doesn't have it, so the job of the leader, what we pay the leader for, is to have access to this information that we've been talking about, that Judy described so beautifully in the beginning. So one I could say, leaders feel like, oh, these kind of inklings that come to me, these glimmers of possibility, they're interfering with the work to be done. I would say, no, that is your work.
Right.
So in some ways, we're challenging all leaders to be paying attention to that. So if I am running an accounting department and somebody comes up to me and says, I never really wanted to be an accountant, am I paying attention to it and tuning into it and supporting it and capturing that moment for that person to say, do you realize how much more vitality you had when you said you wanted to be a lumberjack rather than an accountant?
Exactly.
Judy?
Exactly.
Right. And it's going to make a mess of things. All right. I mean, it's going to disorder things in our organization, and it disorders things in ourselves when one of these goes to work on us, because we thought we were going here and it's going to take us someplace else. And the someplace else has a lot of unknown in it. So it means that we have to take a deep breath and be willing to set aside essentially what are the assumptions and plans that we're lumbered with that we didn't realize we were. And I use Rick's language, go for the energy in ourselves and in other people, and assume that that will take us to the places we need to go. I mean, I'm struck, ABBA, the singing group, one of my favorite groups, has a new song out, and it's delightful. It's just them. And the title is, It's Just a Notion. And I think that's it. It's just a notion that keeps at me.
Increase your acuity to see the light, whether it comes from inside or out. Increase your willingness, ability, and courage to move towards the light.
Right.
Because what Judy and I have found in our work and ourselves is, you move towards this little pinpoint of light, and you move towards it, and you move towards it, and all of a sudden it does this.
Mhm.
And often it will tell us something about ourselves we never knew.
Right.
Um, Judy reminded me, I got a call from Peace Corps Nepal saying, hey, come be the shrink for this training program for Peace Corps Nepal. And I'd only been at UC Davis for a year. And I was so bloody excited I could hardly stand it. I didn't understand it, didn't know Nepal, didn't know Peace Corps, didn't know. I was so excited I couldn't stand it. But immediately what I said, it's only been here a year, and I can't go to them and say, hey, how about giving me about another year off so I can do this? So I turned them down. And I literally was surprised. I was surprised how I longed to do that. Would dream about that phone call coming again. And fortunately it did. And the guy who went to Nepal, who took that, who moved towards that light, that guy who said yes and went there is not the guy who came back. And that's part of the prize.
Right. These are life-changing experiences.
They really can be. And it can start with that.
Yeah. When you talked about that and how small it is, and then it opens out to everything. An analogy for me is fireflies. And so here in the summertime, I can look up in the trees and there are fireflies, but you can't capture them. Okay, it's over here, and then it's over there, and then it's over here. And sometimes I think these kinds of inklings or intuitions will keep coming back. I mean, Rick, you got lucky. They called back, but you were in misery for a long time until they did. It was like the fireflies were still out there and you couldn't quite grab them. And I think one of the reasons that kind of analogy is helpful to me is logic is not going to capture these fireflies. It's an entirely different natural process. And our thought that our minds can somehow make sense of this in a logical way and essentially grab them and put them in a jar, I think it leads us astray. We need to spend a lot of time just being with those little points of light and staying with them and moving toward them and see what they open up for us.
So it feels like the younger generations kind of got a better handle on that than us. I was just thinking about that. You know, it seems like you can leave college and someone says, I'm going to buy a van and live in it and drive the country and pick up jobs where I want. And I wonder whether that's because to some degree they can't afford a house. And so that frees them from the shackles of a mortgage and things like that. And it's again that, hey, I'm going with my intuition. I'm going with my gut. I will be okay. And on all the fears that the parents might say and say, well, how are you going to protect yourself? How are you going to survive? How are you going to pay for things? They're not, again, shackled by.
They'll figure it out. And that's what happens. I guess if I had to give one piece of advice in some way, it's like when you are gifted with that wisdom, when you are gifted with that picture, when you are gifted with that decisive moment, let your excitement be greater than your fear. Right? Don't feed your fear. And I think in our experiences, whether we're sailing the Atlantic, becoming a White House Fellow, standing at the door of Pan Am, or finding yourself in Nepal, you know, it's like we didn't figure it all out, but our excitement brings us forward, and we don't nurture the fear, and we let the excitement beat the fear back.
So that's in my mind, a great way to close the 40 minutes we've just spent together talking, because we've talked about tune in to the data that's around us that is coming maybe subconsciously, create the space to digest it, understand that those things that present truth and vitality and fear are probably those places we need to go, and make sure that the excitement overwhelms the fear. If that's what you're really tuned into. So thanks again, Rick and Judy, for a wonderful conversation. And hopefully inspiration for people to pick up and pay attention and do something that feeds their passion rather than their fear.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
And thank you to everybody who's listening, and make sure that you like, subscribe, and most importantly these days, give us a review, because that can pop us up the rankings so that other people can find this as well. And feel free to share these conversations with somebody who you think might get value from it. Thanks for listening.
That was the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. My name's David Wheatley. For further information about Humanergy, go to humanergy.com or check out our latest book, What Great Teams Do Great, from all good bookstores. Have a good one. Stay healthy.